9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's Thursday. We talk about politics on Thursdays. And of course, we usually talk about politics with our friends, Simon Rosenberg of the Hopium Chronicles. How you doing, Simon?
I've been better, David.
That's not surprising. And Tara McGowan of the Courier Newsrooms and countless other ventures. How are you doing today, Tara?
I'm okay. Happy to be with you both.
Well, we're happy. I'm happy to see both of you guys. Obviously, the election was 2 days ago as we record this. And I think we just need to do a postmortem and be as, I think everybody would like to know what's on your minds. Let me start with you, Tara. How are you feeling about what happened, and more importantly, what are you feeling about why it happened?
Well, what happened is that Donald Trump won, and won big, and won the popular vote, and Democrats lost the White House, the Senate, and likely the House. And I think that in this moment of reflection and reckoning, of which there needs to be a great deal of, and deep introspection and everything, I think one of the things that keeps bubbling up for me is just coming to the very, very, very stark reality that Trump and his extremism and the extremism on the right are not an aberration, and they were not an aberration. And that Democrats in general, as well as the media and I think a lot of elites on our side and in the pro-democracy movement missed what I think started really a very long time ago, maybe as early as 2010, in terms of the rejection of politics and political parties as we know them in this country by the working class, and an increasingly diversified working class in this country because of income inequality, and neither party or political system really doing very much to right the wrongs of an unfettered capitalist society. And I think that populist leaders, especially at the national level, have been the ones to really be able to empathize, whether they're honest or genuine or not, with those folks in a way that also sheds light on the hypocrisy inherent in some of the Democratic Party's messaging in general. And I am saying this all from the context of somebody that has perpetuated that in certain ways over time. So this is there's a lot of humility here. This isn't a finger pointing. This is just sort of my deeper observation, is that we lost a sense of the true pulse of a lot of people in this country who struggle and are looking for somebody to do them better. And the argument of burning down the system as we know it is much more appealing in certain ways, and that the economy is, and just money in people's pockets and how people feel security-wise and financially is still the dominant, visceral thing that the most people who Democrats lost or who didn't turn out in this country are worried about. And so there needs to be a lot of tearing down and a lot of rebuilding from scratch and a lot of humility, I think, in order to really, really understand how to bring back communities who voted against their interests, but don't believe that that's the case.
Simon?
How do I follow that? Look, we have a lot of work to do. And I think what I've been saying to my community is that the next few years is going to be really hard. And there's going to be a lot of damage done to the country. And we have to sort of steady ourselves for that. Even if Trump does a quarter of what he's proposed, it's going to be ugly. And I do think we have a lot of work to do. Something that Tara and I talk about and often, and has been part of the reason you exist, David, is that we have to start getting very serious about competing with them in the information space. And, they are just so much louder than we are. They define the terms of the debate. They can move things like the false story of Biden stealing money from North Carolina and giving it to undocumented immigrants. This stuff becomes, front of mind for 40% of the country in 2 days, and that capacity to define the terms of the debate, to lie relentlessly about their opponents, about the economy, about everything, there's a structural imbalance. And we can usually close the gap during our campaigns, right? We raise all this money and we have all the field operations and we can sort of mitigate this day-to-day advantage they have over us. But now we're going to be in a situation where for the next year, we're not going to have campaigns. We're not going to have money. We're not going to have door knocking. Trump's going to have the White House and his right-wing noise machine and this imbalance that exists. And hopefully we'll have the House. I'm not giving up yet. But this imbalance, the structural imbalance and what I call loudness is going to become far more apparent than it is. And I think that Courier Newsrooms exists in part to address this imbalance and this asymmetry. But this is something that, we just spent $750 million on a super PAC that's not clear moved the needle on anything. And we need to take a quarter of that, a third of that, and start putting it into organizations like Courier Newsroom and This Place, David, and Midas Touch and others. There's an urgency to this now, in my view, in order to be able to be competitive in our democracy. I mean, this is an enormously corrosive thing that's happening in our democracy. And I think this is something that I want to put on the table that is going to really matter in the next couple of years. If, as Tara said, if we're going to have a strategic response to what just happened, some of this, we're going to have discussions about the economy and all that other stuff. That's going to be great. But this is like a must-have that we're going to fall further and further behind in the information space.
Is there a problem, Tara, that we don't have the communications platform, or is it that we don't have the listening platform?
It's both. It's both. And as somebody who has been beating this drum for 9 years now and has built one of the fastest growing left-leaning media networks in this country, I will say that the amount of resources that we get at Courier are pathetic compared to the amount of money that is spent on poll and survey tested advertising at scale. So what Simon said, I agree with. We still are trying to inform our voters and our potential voters using formats and platforms in ways that are not how people consume information today. We are still engaging in the fights that Trump and the Republican Party are not with legacy media, who, by the way, are not on our side because they are on the side of their audiences and their business interests and or their billionaire investors' interests like Washington Post and Jeff Bezos. We are spending time and resources and energy trying to placate them to reach increasingly smaller audiences instead of investing in trying to actually compete in the information ecosystem with really, really robust, scalable media. And I am very grateful for all of the resources that we have been able to raise and deploy at Courier to boost our news, to engage more low-informed and less engaged Americans, but it is pennies to the dollar of what the right has and has invested. And we didn't grow nearly as quickly. Like, I actually think we had a very big impact. I think that will come out in the data when the voter files are updated in terms of our audience and our reach and their voting behavior and propensity for voting increasing, but it's minuscule compared to half this country living in an alternate reality. Like, I will tell you, I canvassed in North Philly on election day. Most of the day I did 150 doors. And these are Democrats, people who, if and when they have voted Democrat, right? This was a GOTV list. And I talked to more than a few Black men in North Philly who were like quoting word for word right-wing media talking points to me about why they don't like Kamala Harris or why she's going to put us in more wars. Like, it has penetrated beyond just the older white Fox News and news watching audiences in a very, very, very profound way. And we can compete with that if we are resourced to the levels that our advertising programs are resourced in election cycles. But we have to do this work year round. That's the other thing people forget. The right wing is driving their narratives and driving the national media's response to those narratives and amplification of those narratives every single day, year round, without fail, in election years and in non-election years. What do? We go down, right? Our campaigns and our committees go down. They raise money and then they go up in the last month to 3 months of an election and think that that's going to make any difference when you have literally lost entire communities who don't trust you anymore because they haven't heard from you until they want you to show up and give them your vote. So I think that there is an enormous amount of work that needs to be done and an enormous amount of brave, bold investment that needs to occur incredibly rapidly. Because, by the way, legacy media is about to get shut down if they are not completely obedient and complicit with the Trump administration. He has been very clear. He made a comment about killing journalists last week before the election. And I won't be surprised if and when they choose to do that, when they are in power, to be able to instill fear amongst all journalists and media from holding them accountable. And so what is our response to that? Certainly not going to be advertising programs.
So let me ask a couple of specific questions about the outcome. And, Simon, in some respects, the biggest question is this: where did 14 million voters go? Where did the net difference between Joe Biden's turnout in 2020 and Kamala Harris's turnout in 2024 go? Because Donald Trump didn't pick it up. He didn't get more. He got less than he got in 2020 by 4 million votes. And I would add, just because I would like to hear you address it, if somehow we had picked up a third of those 14 million voters, we would have won. So what happened?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I haven't seen the data in the states in the battleground states, whether there was significant erosion. I mean, I know that in Wisconsin, for example, we actually did better. We had more people vote for us than in 2020, just in terms of raw numbers. So I think these things are related. I think these two things are related. And I want to just say two quick things to build on something Tara said, and then I'm going to answer your question. One is, there's been a lot of discussion about our underperformance with Hispanics and with, white working class voters, but we also we really underperformed with young people and like in a unbelievable way. She's right now in the exit polls, we're only plus 11 with young people, 18 to 29-year-olds. That's going to be the lowest performance for us in a presidential election, I don't know, in 20 years, potentially, way below what Biden got. And I think these things are connected, right? Is that Trump is loud. The Republicans are loud. They're talking all the time to people. I mean, I wrote about today on Hopium that when you look, I looked at polling last week, and in the Economist YouGov poll has all sorts of interesting questions about the economy. And this one is, are there more jobs being created than not, right? And we just had, in this administration, we just had more jobs created in 4 years than any administration in American history. And 80% of voters either said jobs were staying the same or we were losing jobs. And the question you have to ask yourself is that understanding is so incredibly at odds with the reality. It's like they're living in a different country than the country they live in. And we have to understand that that's something that's happened to them, right? That's something that didn't just happen. It happened to them. This is information that was conveyed to them. The lying about Biden's economy and the success of Biden's economy has been a central reason that Kamala Harris didn't win. They ended up having, and I'm going to talk more about this, but we ended up spending the last few weeks of the election talking about telling people that prices were too high, which is not really a good thing to tell people when they blame us for that, right? And so part of it is she had nowhere else to go because the issue around the economy and people's well-being had been so grossly distorted by the Republicans over so many years. And frankly, our management of this issue when Biden was in the White House was wildly insufficient, and it was not something that could be fixed in a campaign by the time that Kamala took over. She was in a very huge deficit on the economy, despite us living in what may be the best economy in the last 60 years in the United States, right? So I think these things, David, are related. I think that part of what happened in 2022 is that I often have said on here that there were two elections in 2022. There was a bluer election inside the battleground where we had our big campaigns and we were able to control the information environment and mitigate their information superiority and push our performance to the upper end of what's possible. And there was a redder election outside where we didn't have these big campaigns. And part of what's happening is that when we don't have the spectacle of a campaign in an election, we fall back. We lost ground in California. We lost ground in New Jersey. We lost ground in New York. We lost ground in Illinois. These big Democratic states saw, got things in Virginia, right, where we didn't have the campaign. We fell backwards. Some of that, a big chunk of that number, David, is Democrats not voting for us in these big battleground states where we didn't have competitive elections. And so, what do we do about that? To me, this is in part because the campaign, our world goes into 7 states and we communicate like crazy in 7 states and we leave everybody else out. And what happens is they don't vote, like there's erosion and people aren't voting because we're not actually asking them to vote. We're not talking to them. There's not any campaign in these places. Meanwhile, in the 2 biggest Republican states, Texas and Florida, they had competitive races. And so they had strong turnout of Republicans, and this dramatically affected the popular vote. I mean, if we had run some kind of modest campaign statewide in California, New York, and Illinois, she would have won the popular vote in this election. And would that have been something worth the investment because of the narrative and the sense of mandate that he has? These are things that need to be discussed. And I think that the targeting regime of the new data world that we live in has overamped too far, and that politicians need to take back their politics from the data bros, in my view, because to sort of paraphrase Tara McGowan, the idea that people only get information from the state they live in as opposed to their non-geographical networks, right, is like complete old think in the way that we all actually interact with information. And so part of what Tara is getting at is that, and I think what's exciting about what's going to come next, as terrifying, as difficult a time this is going to be, this is going to be a period of reinvention and reimagination for our politics. It's critical. And, we went through this. I was part of this 20 years ago after Bush won, where we created organizations like the Democracy Alliance and Center for American Progress and Media Matters and all these sort of creative things. NDN, the new NDN, I rebranded it and rebuilt it, right? We built all these new capacities for us, new institutions. We're going to need to do the same thing now. But there's an urgency to Tara's point. This is not something that can start in the fall. It has to happen immediately so that we're on the playing field, by the spring, because the first 100 days is going to be 100 days of woe for America. And we need to start being able to compete in that period.
Okay. Tara, let me frame a question to you, looking at this from a different perspective. I've sat and I've talked to some people in the campaign. And I, until Monday, with a few exceptions, was thinking, oh, this is a really good campaign. I mean, she was good. She was on stage. She was terrific. Her energy was up. Crowds were electric. The things I could see in the campaign, they looked really good. But then I talked to some people who were in the campaign or who were in the office of the vice president. They were like, well, there was a big fight a few weeks ago because the focus of some of the campaign people was on virtual voter outreach as opposed to real voter outreach. There was a big fight because they were not spending money on reaching Latinos. At the end of the day, they were also not spending money on reaching Black voters, but they decided to spend a little money on reaching Black voters. There were other examples of things like this that I saw. And so part of the question is, was this team guilty of making some mistakes based on what you and Simon have said that need to be, carefully reassessed as we build the team for 2026 and 2028?
So, one, I am not in the business of finger pointing. And I want to just say for the record that I think Kamala Harris herself ran a flawless campaign and in many ways was a flawless candidate that did not deserve the results that she got. And oh my God, what she did and pulled off and how she rose to the occasion with essentially 100 days to run a campaign is incredible. I also think that tens of millions of Americans fell in love with her and got to know her for the first time. And I don't think she's going anywhere. And I am definitely one of them. I did not go into this campaign knowing very much about her outside of what everyone knew. And now she's one of my favorite politicians we have. And I'm excited to see what she does as a leader in this very dark period of time we're about to enter. My understanding is that the campaign, which was the Biden campaign, let's be very clear, right? And she made a very smart decision to maintain continuity when she became the nominee to be able to keep everything moving forward and not disrupt strategy in a massive way. Maybe that was a mistake, maybe not. But the calculations that were made for the Biden campaign when Biden was the candidate was essentially evidence-based or not, a hope, a dream, and a manifestation that it was going to be a low turnout election because enthusiasm for him and just the ticket between him and Trump was so low. And so there was a banking on a low enthusiasm, low turnout election. And thus that determined their overall strategy that remained consistent even when she became the nominee, which is very broadcast, meaning national, high-level advertising online and television, where all the money was spent, as opposed to building the bones that are needed a minimum of a year in advance to actually run a field operation, organizing driven presidential campaign, the likes of which Obama and Hillary both had. They chose not to build an organizing first campaign because they didn't believe that they would have the enthusiasm to turn into volunteers to run a ground game. Fast forward to when she's the candidate and the enthusiasm becomes incredibly high, they don't have the time to build that infrastructure that requires time to deploy the resources in that. So the resources again went into media. This is my understanding from the information I have and is publicly available. So I don't think it was a mistake, unless the mistake was made at the very front end to not plan for a potential situation in which they could leverage higher enthusiasm. The enthusiasm I saw and felt on the ground in places like Philly around her were Obama 08 levels of enthusiasm. If they had had the infrastructure in place, if she had had a longer runway, I think that we could have pulled this off, but that should not distract us from the larger issue at hand, which is that the Democratic Party does have a message and a brand problem. It does have a communications problem. It is out of touch with most of these Americans. I do think we still could have won with Biden and or with her if she had had more of a runway. But I think that the strategy that was baked in that did not serve her and her flawless candidacy well was a strategy that was designed around low enthusiasm, low turnout for Biden.
I always feel like asking a question, Simon, but you always want to respond to what Tara just said instead of answering my question.
Well, I feel lucky to be able to, Tara and I haven't had a big conversation yet. So, this has been helpful to me to hear from her today. Yeah, look, I think it's incumbent upon the people who ran the campaign to tell us what they think happened. I think this is really important. I think the level of shock, the level of freak out that exists in the family right now, there's a void. There's a lot of really bad faith commentary right now and bad hot takes, fresh hot takes coming from all corners of the family. And they need to fill that void. They need to share with us what they think happened. And I just want to level set on one thing, David, so you're not so hard on yourself, is that let's review what the data was, the public data was going into Election Day, right? So she had an incredible week of polling the week before the election, so much so, it was her best week of the whole election, so much so that all of the forecasters, all of them, tipped to calling the election for her. Nate Silver, 538, everyone else, right? All of them did. The second thing is the early vote data, which is also a sign of enthusiasm and intensity, right? And organizational capacity. We went into Election Day with better early vote results than we had in 2020 in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nebraska too, and in Wisconsin. And so what happened, right, is that everyone underestimated the Election Day turnout for Trump. which was enormous, and including his own campaign, by the way, because his own campaign was telling reporters on Monday they thought they were going to lose. And so people who thought we were going to win on election day weren't being delusional, hopeful, full of hopium. It was where the entire world that looks at data and everything else believed it was going. Jen O'Malley Dillon said on the Sunday before the election, I am confident we're going to win, right? And then we didn't win. And, there was, we're going to see. I'm still waiting. I'm going very slow in my interpretation of this election because I want to wait and see. And I also need time. There's so much data flowing at us. But I think to your point you made in the very beginning, this election was as much about our underperformance than it was about his strength. And the second thing is, and I found this to be very thoughtful, is that the FT, the Financial Times, released an analysis today showing that for the first time since World War II, in the developed world, every government that has had an election has lost seats or lost ground for the first time since 1945. And what their argument was that part of the tide that we were up against was the profound disruption that happened in people's lives because of COVID and because of global inflation and because of, I also think, to add to that, the sort of shaky Biden, right? Him not being completely on top of things and looking old and like not totally together. And that all of that kind of congealed into, and they exploited it. And frankly, and I'm going to be writing about this next few weeks. I think this whole decision to not, take credit for how well things were actually going in America and how we had gotten to the other side of COVID. And I know that we're going to be told that was an impossible thing to sell to people by the time she got into the election in July. And all she needed to do was say, prices are too high. I'm going to solve it. I know this is your number one issue. But we've neglected to make an argument that was fundamentally true, which is that we did a really good job in managing COVID and the economy compared to the rest of the world. And inflation was now, Donald Trump is going to announce in a few days, I'm sure, that he made inflation disappear, right? And then inflation is now interest rate cuts because of him. And inflation's at 2.1%. And he's going to say, I came in and now there's no more inflation, right? And we did that, right? But we didn't tell anybody that. We also didn't tell anybody that inflation was caused by COVID, which people believed, by the way, supply chain problems, Russia, OPEC, and it was a global phenomenon. So instead, what we told people was that it was due to price gouging, there's a legitimate open question about whether that's actually true, by the way. And I generally think we should be taking the side of things that are true and as opposed to things that may be notional, right? And so we also lost, I think, during the Biden presidency, there were key economic moments that we lost to them. And we lost the definition of what was actually happening. And so when Kamala took the helm in July, her space to operate in was already incredibly prescribed and very narrow in a way that was challenging for her. And they did a good job. Look, I think this was, as I want to echo something Tara said, Kamala Harris did a phenomenal job. And this is going to go down in history as one of the greatest political performance. She was given a very tough assignment and she kicked ass and did unbelievably well. But part of what happened is that the Biden administration mismanaged and mishandled some of these critical economic moments that limited her space. When she couldn't answer the question about whether Joe Biden had made the country better off, that wasn't because she couldn't answer the question. It was that his approval rating was so far down. People's understanding of the economy was so distorted by all these right-wing lies that she got boxed into a place that was kind of a silly place, but it was the only place she could go, And so I do think that I want to echo to conclude with this, and I'm sorry that our answers are long. I'm unbelievably tired and I'm frustrated, angry, and pissed off like everybody else, right? Is that, and a little scared, to be honest, is that I think there's so many lessons we have to learn, but some of them was that the way we messaged around the economy over the entire Biden administration, I think, was inadequate and made it more difficult for us to win. And given how central this issue was. And so people had a sense that things were far worse than they really are. And in part, I wrote about this today. You can't expect people to believe things are good unless you tell them, right? And if we don't take credit for things that are happening and be truthful about the country that people live in and the things that are happening around them, and if we allow the right wing to define that for us, we're doing a disservice to the American people. The American people deserve to know that the economic recovery here was better than any other developed nation in the world. Inflation was a global phenomenon, and that we did better in managing this than any other country in the world. And nobody believes that, right? Because we were told we can't say things like that, right? Because we're going to create distance between us and people in their own lives. And I do think this conversation that Tara and I are having, and we may not be coming at this in the same place today, is I think the discussion around these issues are really important going forward in order for us to really try to figure out how it is that, as Bill Clinton said, 52 million jobs created in America since 1989. 50 million of them have been under Democratic presidents. We've had 3 consecutive Democratic presidents see enormous growth, rising wages, lower deficits. They've had 3 consecutive presidents create recessions, and people think the Republicans are better on the economy than we are. That is a system-wide structural failure of the entire Democratic Party. And it's costing us, right? It costs us. And I'm proud of Joe Biden. I just want to say this. I want to go on record. Like, this guy was handed a load of crap on the first day. He had one of the worst first days of any president in American history. And I think he ended up, despite incredible opposition, doing a phenomenal job and has left this country far better than he found it. And I'm incredibly grateful to him for having done so.
Okay.
Can I respond, though, David, to 2 quick things? I'll keep them quick. Oh no, the hands on the head.
Yeah.
Just quickly, because I agree, Simon, with most of what you're saying, but I want to challenge one point that I think is really important. I actually think the Biden administration, number one, did a phenomenal job about getting us the soft landing and turning this economy around. And I think they did a better job than Democratic administrations or governments had before in communicating that. But what they communicated was not good, because what they communicated, while true, the most job growth, declines in unemployment, right? The market stable, all of these things, right? That is not personal. People, you cannot tell people that something is better than they feel for themselves. And what Republicans do, because they're crass and they're ruthless and they lie a lot, but is so effective, is that they're like, we're going to put money into your pocket. Right? Trump, I heard it at the doors. Trump's plan to not tax overtime. That's like, I know how many hours of overtime I work a week. I know exactly how much money that is in my pocket if that's not taxed. Not taxing tips, same thing. What did we say? Oh, we're going to go after corporations that are doing price gouging. Whether or not that's the reason or not, nobody can connect that dot in 5 seconds or less about how that's going to put more money in their pockets the way not taxing their overtime is. So like, we actually have to remember, like, people vote on what their life experiences and their perception of why that is and who to blame. And Republicans and Trump in particular are so good at saying, blame them, by the way. And if you vote for me, I'm going to put money directly in your pocket. Where Democrats are like, blame this actual, real, honest situation that we went through as a pandemic and what that happened to the global economy and the domestic economy. And this is why, and this is really nuanced. And so I'm going to go after these corporations that I know you don't like either. And it's like, they're like, sort of like, well, I'm getting more money in my pocket.
I got to say something here. I just bear with me, guys, and let me say something for 2 minutes. I was a senior economic official in the U.S. government for a while, and I've thought about these issues a lot. And I think you're both making some points that are really, really important and are not getting made and are not being discussed. And I just want to clarify them in a couple of points. One, the difference, but Democrats talk about what they try to make an argument that is rational, and they address what you think. Republicans address what you feel. And that's really, really important. But on these economic issues, I think the Biden administration did a great job in the economy and a mediocre job on communicating about it. And the reason I think that's true is because they chose a path that was different from every other Democratic administration and Republican administration in the past 40 years. They stepped away from neoliberalism. They said, we're not going to fix the banks. We're not going to talk about interest rates. We're going to try to make sure that everybody has got a job. But the unemployment rate was 5 or 6%. They reduced it by a couple of points. That meant that they were affecting 1 or 2% of the American people, whereas inflation was affecting everybody. And what's going to happen now is that the neoliberals in the Democratic Party and in Trump's party are going to come back and say, our goal has always got to be controlling inflation, not focusing on these other things, not bottom up, middle out. And it is a mistake for the American people. And if the Democrats who believe in those things want to continue to champion them, they've got to figure out a way to communicate that. And I don't think it's that hard. I think Biden could very easily have said, look, we're in a crisis and we've got a choice. We can focus on creating jobs for the people who don't have them, but there's going to be a little higher inflation. So we're all going to bear some burden for that. But in the long run, we're going to have a healthier economy. Or we can do it the other way. And we're going to let the bottom fall out for a couple of million of our people. There has to be a way to communicate it. It wasn't communicated. There is a policy issue at the center of this. And we're going to have to grapple with that too. We can't get to everything in the limited amount of time that we've got. And I'm so grateful for you, the existence of you guys, much less, just having these conversations. But I want to give you each 2 minutes. When we signed on, Tara was like, yesterday was a tough day, and now I'm ready to get back into the fight. Simon said, I'm still having a tough day. But but I want to know, because people who listen to this woke up, they were despondent. The world didn't fit with what they knew about the world. The idea that Donald Trump, awful as he is, could beat Kamala Harris, who ran this brilliant campaign, is hard to compute. And now they've got to figure out, what do they do next? How do they, where do they go right now? Sign up for the Gavin Newsom 2028 campaign? What do they got to do right now, Tara, than Simon?
Local. Go local. Fund progressive and left-leaning media like Courier and Deep State Radio. Fund media that's not going away now that there are no campaigns doing any messaging. That is number one. You want to put your dollars into work right now. We need to build our alternative media in this country, and it has to be strong. Number two, go local, because now we need to focus on community services and community support and community protection, because there are so many vulnerable communities that are going to suffer the worst under this administration and this regime, I think is the appropriate word. And that is going to be the biggest and most urgent fight, is protecting those communities in every way, shape, or form. And the other thing that I would say is that I think we need to move away, and I'm gonna botch this too, and I'm gonna make mistakes on it, but we're not entering a resistance. And Simon, you said this to me yesterday in our brief conversation we had, but I think that this is really important. Resistance was when we did think that Trump and his agenda and the MAGA agenda was an aberration. And now we know that it's not. Now we know that there is a real movement of people in this country away from the Democratic Party and what they see as the Democratic Party platform and values, or how they address the economy, as we're talking about, et cetera. And what needs to happen is people need to understand that this is going to be a very long and hard chapter in our country in order to be able to rebuild power. And it is going to happen and have to happen from the ground up. And that means focusing on local. One of the advantages that we currently have in the Democratic Party in this country is that we have a lot of governorships. We have a lot of governors, and governors are going to be, once again, the front line against this administration to be able to protect people in their states. And we're going to have to do an enormous amount of work to be able to protect and provide for all of the people in Republican states that are so excited that their leader just became, about to become the commander in chief. And so I just think the more that people can do to really invest locally in building local infrastructure and organizations and supporting those to be able to actually support people is where the focus needs to turn to, because I think the national conversation in the federal government, a lot of people are going to tune out in general because we're all exhausted and depressed. But the real work is going to have to happen on the ground at the state level. And we have to look at the map and be really clear-eyed, especially if we do lose the House, on how we make those gains back within 2 years' time. And we're looking at a Senate map that might not give Democrats power until 2030 or 2029 at the earliest. And so we have to be really clear-eyed about how do we actually build movements in those states that are going to be up, that are not on the terms and the messaging strategy we've been deploying.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, that's all good advice. I usually go in front of Tara, so it's been actually a pleasure to go after her today, and so I can just say, yeah, I agree with all that. And I will say that my version of what she just said in Hopium Simon language is that we are going to need to become more conscious about the information warrior aspect of all of this, meaning that we're not going to have an election to go work on and postcards to write and the canvassing and all the stuff that people do and donating for a while. And how we all engage and try to define the early days of Trumpism, in the 100 days, the first 100 days, we're going to need to be loud here ourselves and through organizations, but also through our own networks and through organizations that can help us be loud. I mean, we cannot, there's going to be this, it's going to be a blitzkrieg, right? Like it's going to just be this overwhelming assault on all of us in the first 100 days. And we need to get ready for that. I mean, we need to rest now. We need to rest and regain our balance. I mean, many people worked really hard over the last few months in particular. And this was a very emotional week, and we need to rest and take care of ourselves and take care of each other through all of this. But there has to be a greater consciousness in the family about each of our roles in being an information warrior and communicating things that matter to you, right? That are important to you. I mean, people often ask me, how do I help you be loud? And I always say, spend time on the things that matter to you. Don't read talking points from other people, right? Is there an issue that really matters to you? It could be abortion. It could be immigration. It could be, whatever it is that Trump's going to move on and make that something you kind of know and get to know and be communicating about that with folks to help for people to understand the extremism that they're going to witness with their own eyes. I think one of the most fascinating parts of the first 100 days is how much the business people around Trump, Musk and the New York guys, are going to persuade him not to pursue parts of his agenda that would be economically ruinous for the country. And the two most importantly are the tariffs, which would be disastrous for us and for the global economy, and also the mass deportation program, which would also be very devastating for our economy. And I think that's going to be one of the most interesting things of the early days of Trump, which is where do they really go? What, he never built the wall, right? That he wanted to build. He never got Mexico to pay for it. And we just have to be ready. I mean, I think to be involved in our society and the debate in this country in a way that's different perhaps than we have in the past, our own roles in all of this becomes really important. And also that we can't check out, we need to take care of ourselves, but we can't check out.
That's the truth. We've got to wake up and be undaunted by what has happened and find a path forward. And the next phases of this are all going to be upon us real soon.
Yep.
Further analysis of this sort is the kind we'll keep conducting here, and we'll try to build our impact, and we'll keep talking to Simon and Tara and others to try to do that. But for now, just let me say, guys, you worked unbelievably hard on this campaign. All of us did. Both of you are national treasures. I really feel that despite the fact that we did not ultimately win, many of the gains that we made, and we did make gains, were due to you guys. And I look forward to continuing to follow and be friends with both of you because I admire you and I learn a lot from you. So thank you very much. And everybody, next week we'll be starting all over again. So join us again here at the DSR Network. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Tara. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.